let's do the add-ons. So before you start, go to preferences. Let's do enabled add-ons only. Okay, so you're gonna want this one enabled. If it's not, just go type it up here, Node Wrangler. It should show up. Check the box. F2 is pretty helpful also. Not for this specifically, but I would enable that too. Alright, so let's start. Geometry nodes are going to be like, it's sort of like a more advanced way of editing the geometry, the mesh of your object. So that's going to be like your object modifiers, all this fun stuff, and then also in your edit mode, some of these tools here are going to be available. A couple ways to get to the geometry nodes menu editing. Easiest way is their workspace that they have up here in your little I don't know if that's what it's called, your workspace menu, I guess, toolbar. And this is going to give you 3 windows. So this one up in the top left hand corner is called a spreadsheet. I wouldn't worry too much about this one. Basically what this is just the position of all the vertices in this shape right here. This is helpful if you like need a specific value that you're going to put down in a node here, or if you're doing like game design stuff, you need to keep track of how many faces you've got going on for like rendering. And then obviously you have your view window, which is going to be the same as your layout or modeling menu for the most part, except smaller. And then down here, this is going to be your geometry node editor. And if you're familiar with node editors, you can probably skip this part. We'll do some examples on this cube here. This button down here, new, is going to create kind of the, I think it's called the node tree, we will be using to kind of edit the geometry of the shape. So as you can see, there's a group input here. I'm just clicking and dragging to move this around. Okay, it's not showing the frickin' keys in this menu. Okay, I'll just say what I'm hitting while I'm doing. Alright, what's some other stuff? Oh, and then if you want to do like a node group, you're going to do Command G, and then that's going to like, and then tab to toggle in and out of that, but let's get rid of that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and delete, and we'll get started with the walkthrough. Okay, so today we're going to be making like a force field shield animation using geometry nodes and some other stuff, mostly geometry nodes. It's going to look something like this, by the way. When I originally did this, I was using a beta version of Blender 3.1, which is like unstable. Some of this I'm going to be doing on the fly. We're going to have to work around it because I used some nodes that I guess aren't available in 3.0, but they will be. Okay, so the main issue that I was having was with getting those hexagons with the geometry nodes, and I think I'm just going to give that up, and we're just going to do it to the original shape. I'm going to build each layer of the force field, just do some simple geometry node stuff to it, and then we'll go back in and do the animation stuff after we build them. Let's do like 3 layers. Okay, so I'm going to go, let's do the commands. I'm going to do Shift A, I'm going to add an icosphere. And then this is triangles, and we want hexagons. And it would be nice if they're perfect, but that's not possible. So then once you're in vertex mode, I think it's Control Shift B. Yeah, okay, so Control Shift B, and then you can keep holding Shift if you want to do like a slower, kind of just drag around until you get, that looks pretty good, I guess. And I'm going to go ahead and name this 2, because the sphere has 2 levels of subdivision. That'll make sense in a second. Like one is kind of be like glass, almost like panes, and then like the edges are like light up. I'm going to Shift D to duplicate this shape, and then just right click to get it back into place where it was, where the original object was. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and name this one 2W, because it's going to be a wireframe object. Last layer, I want like smaller hexagons as well. Let's see, let's go ahead and add one more shape, icosphere, and then when we go down here, see the subdivisions, we're going to turn this to 3. We're going to go back into edit mode, you guessed it, same thing. We're going to drag these and we're going to make some hexagons using the shift key to get a more precise control over my drag. Okay, that looks pretty good. We got these 3 shapes right here. You can hide them and unhide them, which we're going to be doing a lot. With these buttons over here, or when it's selected, you can press the H key and it'll hide it as well. Let's go ahead and hide this 3rd layer for now, because we're going to just work with these first 2 we have. Let's go ahead and hide the wireframe as well. Let's just work with this first one right here. You can go into the Geometry Nodes tab here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this menu here up, and I'm going to change this to the Geometry Node Editor with this little menu here, because I want the screencast keys to stay. And also because it doesn't matter what workspace you're in, you can access all the commands from pretty much anything. Okay, let's go ahead and add a new geometry node tree to this object. So the first thing that I want to do is separate the faces. And again, this is a pain in the ass to do without geometry nodes. So the first thing we're going to do is Shift A. We're going to do split edges, and you'll see that this isn't really doing anything. It is, but it doesn't look like it, and that's because we're going to go, I'm not actually going to be able to tell you what the because is. You're just going to have to trust me. The smooth modifier after the geometry node modifier, it's going to separate these faces. You're going to be able to control the level of how much it does with the factor slider. So we're going to do 0.3. That feels right. We're going to add one more modifier to this. It's called the solidify modifier, and basically what that's going to do is it's going to add some dimension to what we've got going on here. Oh, by the way, if you want this to always stay, go ahead and press that pin, and then when you change between the modifiers, it won't move. Okay, so this is going to make this thick by a certain degree, and then offset, we're going to put it to 0 so it looks right with the wires, but that sounds like what it is. It's going to be on the inside or the outside of the original face. In the new Blender version, you can turn your squares into hexagons with like a geometry node combo. So coming soon, and that makes this whole thing a lot easier. But for now, this is what we got. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and hide this. I'm going to unhide my wireframe, which doesn't look like wireframe yet, but it will in a second. So same thing, we're going to go in here, add a modifier, and we're going to name this, you guessed it, 2W. And now, alright, how am I going to do that? Shift A, and we're going to do mesh to curve. These faces, this shape is now a wireframe of curves, and that's not going to show up in anything that we have until we add some stuff to it. Now, so we're going to Shift A again, and we're going to do curve to mesh. It still doesn't do anything because we need to assign a profile curve to this, and that's going to be the shape that the thickness is. And for, I think it's always a circle, but I always do a circle curve. That's going to be in the primitive objects section if you're looking for it. Oh, and let's go ahead and turn this resolution down to like 8 or something. We don't need 32. We're going to go ahead and add that to the profile curve. Looks insane right now. That's because the radius of each curve is a meter, and we're going to want that to be way smaller, something like 0.01. That looks pretty good. I'm going to do even smaller than that. I'm going to do 0.05. And if I go ahead and unhide these, you see now we kind of look like a soccer ball. So we have this shape here, and this is all being controlled by these nodes and the modifiers and stuff. We haven't actually like moved a vertex yet, right? We still have this layer here to do, and I think for this one, we're going to do the same edge split trick that we did on the last one, but maybe make them like a little smaller or something so that they look different. At least you're starting, hopefully, to get the idea of what we're getting at over into material mode. I'm going to press the Z key. This isn't, you have to read them. I changed mine. I think it's 2 originally. I'm going to add a plane. Where is that? Okay, I'm going to add a plane. I'm going to bring this down a little bit, and then I'm going to scale it like way up so that we've got like a floor happening. Okay, so there's like a couple ways to animate this. The easiest way that I've found, a lot of other people have found too, is to use another object position to control what's happening to the geometry of our force field. That'll make a lot more sense in a second. So we're going to go to the empty menu in our add object mode, however you want to. We're going to add a empty sphere, and I'm going to move this across across the G key, and then the Y key, I'm going to move it across the Y axis. So it's like there, and then I'm going to scale the whole thing down. I'm going to keep changing it. Should look something like this when you're done. Okay, so this shape, as it moves around, is going to control what part of the force field is showing, what part isn't. So that's how we're going to kind of create this effect of it like growing from a certain point. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick animation timeline right here, just so we can keyframe this real quick. We want the circle to get bigger. When this animates, we're going to want this to scale so that its position includes the position of the force field. The first thing we're going to want to do is get the mask, our object here. We want to get that information into this node tree so that we can use it, right? So for that, we're going to do Shift A, and we're going to use an object info node, and it looks something like this. This menu down here is going to be whichever shape is the object you want information from. You can use a little eyedropper tool to select it, or you can come down to this menu. You've named them nicely, it's easy. So we're going to go add a position node. That's just going to add a little more info, give us that same data we had here. It's just going to be more helpful. So once we have those two, we're going to add one more vector map, and you're going to click distance. Okay, and your two values that you're going to plug in here, you're going to click and drag position to the top vector and location to the bottom vector. I'm going to move this over a little bit. One more node, we're going to add regular map node, and we're going to go into the menu, and we're going to find the greater than. This value here goes there, and the scale from your object info is going to go into the second value here. Then this greater than value here is going to get plugged in to the split edges selection. Once all that stuff is set up, we need to add the part where it, deletes stuff. So we're going to do delete geometry. That's going to go in here. It's going to delete everything. I know that's scary, but only for a second. We're going to take this value and plug it into selection. What you'll see now is when we move this thing around, the faces are getting added and deleted. And what I'm going to do real quick, I'm going to go back to the start frame. I'm going to drag up our sheet a little bit so we can see. And I'm going to press I to insert a keyframe. I did location, rotation, and scale. And then I'm going to let's go to frame 35. And let's scale this up so that it's the whole thing. And then leave a little space on the side. Okay, and then let's go here, I, and insert keyframe, all channels. Cool, so now when we play this, you'll see it kind of does like a loop for us. Okay, so let me explain what's happening here. This delete geometry node is deleting everything, right? So if I remove this, it's just going to delete the whole thing. Okay, so this greater than node is telling this delete geometry to delete any values that are greater than the stuff included in the circle, meaning that any of the values smaller, i.e. stuff inside of the circle, is going to show up, and the stuff outside of the circle is not going to show up. Now we're going to move into the wireframe. Let's put this on like a halfway point so we can sort of see what's happening. I might end up hiding the whole thing. So let's go ahead and unhide the wireframe, and we clicked on it. You can see this change. And what we're going to want to do is set up the exact same thing for the wireframe. We want this to also be controlled by the circle. You can copy and paste. So we're going to hop back into this one and drag, click all of this stuff, Command C, just like any old thing, back into wireframe. With it still selected without clicking, we're going to move it so that it's not in our way. And the most important thing to remember when you're copying and pasting, especially in this, is that this delete geometry has to come after all the stuff we did with the separating faces or the wireframe, depending on what it is. That looks pretty good. I'm going to make one change though. So I'm going to change this to edge because we're dealing with edges here in the faces. Yeah, I think that's just going to give us some more variety happening. If you're happy with the thickness of everything, you can leave it. Remember, you're changing the thickness of these shapes either with the radius of your curved circle down here for the wireframe, and for the glass panes that are going in between, it's going to be your factor slider on the smooth modifier. Let's see, let's make them a little bit closer. Let's do like 3 points. Oh, I guess it's 0 point. But better. All right. We're going to leave this one alone for now. I have other plans for her. I think that we need to assign some materials so that we can shade them later. But you can't just assign materials to an object the normal way, like you would go into like edit mode and assign the faces, whatever. So you have to add it as a node. Super easy, but just something to remember. Set material. Okay, so then that's gonna go in here. Let's call it glass. Okay, so then in this menu, we're gonna click on glass so that this corresponds to that. Same thing, let's do Y, set material, and then Y. But I'm back in my two, the glass panes. So let's go ahead and move some stuff because I'm going to add to this. Let's watch this for a second. Analyze. Okay, couple things. I'm not loving, it's looking really basic as it's coming in. Like it's looking too like uniform, you know, like I want some noise. So the circle's surface points, those positions, we're gonna like add some noise and like mess with it so that these look a little more interesting when they're coming in. We're gonna add a noise texture. It's gonna add some randomness. And I'm actually gonna leave these values as is for now. Add a mix RGB node because I want this noise texture to mix with the location, but I don't want it to, I'm gonna change it to linear light. The noise texture color, I'm going to plug it into color 1 right here. The location, and I'm going to plug it here. And then I'm going to take this color up here, I'm going to plug it in here. The noise texture is going to just like add some variation into where these are coming in. Okay, so we're going to need some math nodes and some vector math nodes. So, okay, here we go. This is a map range node, and basically this is going to give us some values, some sliders of where the randomization can happen, if that makes sense. I'm going to need to copy this node over, and we're going to change these. We're going to change this to a subtract, and we're going to change this to a multiply. We're going to add one more node I forgot about that we need. It's called a normal. Same thing as these positions, it's just giving us more information. So we're going to change this to a multiply. The normal can go into the top right there. So you're going to want to drag this closer because these are going to connect to these, and you're going to want to like have it be in sight. So this subtract node is going into your minimum value. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Because, okay. So then this distance value up here, let's move on. It's going to go into this value here. Yeah. Okay. That's a lot better. So we're not like done yet, but I want to show what happens for context. So I'm going to move this down with the G key. We're going to add a node. It's called the set position node. Alright, so what you can see is happening now is when we add the force field, it's giving us an offset for the shape. That's a little much, right? That's okay. Yeah. Although, if you like it, leave it. But to change that, this subtract value should decrease to get the front part, like the start, closer. I'm going to do 0.05. And then this multiply value is going to control the back half. That looks pretty cool. Alright, so we're in the glass right now, and I want to make this a node group. I'm going to leave the split edges out of it, because that's not necessarily happening for what we're doing. I'm also going to leave the set material out of it, because that's not necessarily the next thing we want happening. So when you're making your node groups, you want to make sure you're kind of paying attention to what's happening. Command G to group the node, and then in this menu we got to do some stuff. We want some stuff to show up in the output, some values, so that they're usable in other things. It'll make more sense in a second. First, we need this scale value right here to be part of the output, and then also we're going to need this distance value right here to be a part of the output as well. I think that's it. We're good. Okay, so then to get in and out of this, you're going to press the tab key. So this is our setup now. A lot cleaner, a lot easier to understand. I think I sort of figured out what I want to do. So we're going to need 6 nodes to do this. And we've added our node group. And to do that, Shift A, group, and then you're going to click the one that you want. I've got 2 math nodes here. One is subtract and one is add. These are both compare float nodes. And then, you know, to type that in, you're going to another math node is an add, and then we have a delete geometry node. So the scale is going to go into this top value here, and this top value here of the subtract and the add, right? Okay, so then this value is going to go into the A's of each of these. And then these values are going to go into the B's. And then the results, the add values here. This value goes into the selection. And then we're going to reconnect the delete geometry here. Let's hide these two just to show. Okay. So this circle, I'll turn on overlays. This circle is expanding. And the values of what's being shown are these 2 values right here, the subtract and the add. I don't know how to explain this. Let's work backwards. So we have the delete geometry node. It's deleting all the mesh, right? The add node is adding the geometry back in at any point that's less than or greater than that line that we created to 2 certain values, which are these 0.5 and 0.5. I'll show you, we can change them. So I can make this 0.1, and then it's much closer I'm gonna set these to, let's do 0.2. Let's do 0.3. And then I'm gonna unhide these. Okay, so now you'll see this is gonna follow the pattern of what's happening on the curve. I'm gonna hide overlays. I'll display for a second. Okay, so then that's what we've got going on for the third one. A lot easier once you kind of understand what's happening. Huge time saver, right? Now we have the force field pretty much done in terms of the geometry of what's happening, except I'm going to add one more node. We're going to do set material for this one as well. We're going to materials. We're going to do a new one. Small hexagons, whatever. I need to add a subdivision on here first, actually. Sorry about that. It's important for a reason. We need materials because we need this to sort of look like a force field, because right now it's all white and it doesn't really look that interesting. And whatever is in there is invisible after it plays. This geometry nodes editor, I'm going to change over to the shader editor. You can either go into the shading tab, and that's going to put you in material mode, and it's also going to add HDRI, I think, to the background. So if you have something shiny, it's going to like reflect. So what we have right here is called a principled BSDF. This is going to be like your main shader for everything. You're going to want to get kind of like a fully rendered picture of what this is going to look like seeing through the glass, all that junk. This little camera right here, and this is going to be our rendering settings for the scene. So this Eevee, it's not going to work for our purposes, so we're going to switch that over to cycles. And what this is, I'm going to press the Z key and I'm going to switch over to rendered. You can also use these buttons up here, I forgot to say, just so we're seeing what's happening. So I'm switching between Eevee and cycles, and you can see that we're not getting as much contrast, we're not getting as much light information as we are in cycles, because cycles is doing these little dots. You can sort of see. So make sure you're changing that. A couple other settings we're going to change while we're in here that's going to make it look nicer and more like Maya, which is like the whole point. GPU compute is, if you have a MacBook, or most computers, I guess, it's going to be faster. It's the graphics computing instead of the computing. I don't know why it's set as default to CPU. It makes absolutely no sense. But change that. It'll speed up the rendering times, literally double them. Easy mistake to make. We don't need 1,000 of these. Let's do like 256. Let's do the minimum 256 too. One more thing, color management. You're going to want to come down here. This is what's going to make it look like Maya's lighting. So this is important. You can't change sRGB. I wish you could, but whatever. I'm going to change to filmic log, very high contrast. This is going to be better for rendering purple. We don't need like an insane light right now. Well, we will for the glass reflection. I'm actually going to do that right now. So I'm going to go add light, point G, and move it up on the Z axis, just so it's making some shadow. So the first thing that I want to do is change the transmission. That's going to change how much information from behind the face is passing through. Kind of see through it right now, kind of not really. First of all, we want our base color to be white, which is clear. I turned my samples way down because I'm also recording this in my computer. It wasn't working, so we're gonna get back to SOT. But if it doesn't look as nice, like it will on yours. Okay, so now we're in the wire editor. And it's gonna be hard to see right now because it's just like the same color as the background and everything else. But I think I want to make this glow, like a color. So I'm going to keep the base color as white. I'm going to come down here to emission. If you're familiar with Unity, you probably know kind of what's happening. Turn that up to brightest it could be, and I'm going to make this let's do a nice blue. You can change the strength of how bright it is with this if you wanted it to be super bright. We're in the hexagon material menu. I want these to kind of be a combo, I think, of the two. So I want them to have glowing blue thing, but I also want them to be transparent, like the glass. So let's do a mix. Some kind of a nice blue, sort of the same thing happening. Also, I want these to emit a color, right? So I think I want the alpha even lower. So I think I want it something like that. We need a thing still for the force field to surround, and that can be whatever you want. Obviously, we're gonna do a cube. You can't really see what's happening there, so I'm gonna go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and do a new material for cube as well. We're going to do a little emission on this guy, just so you can see him through the stuff. Great, okay, so now I think I am going to turn the transmission up on these two. Yeah, that's better. It's going to make it slower, but that's better. Yeah, that's what we got. Might make minor changes before I do some renders, or in between, just if I see shit I don't like. I think my next step logically would be to do some sort of ammunition that's triggering this shield, and then maybe use these maybe like a wire version of these hexagons as some sort of ripple effect when it gets hit. We'll see.